kinds of instruction and guidance from our parents, from school, from the church, from our community at large. And this instruction and guidance is coming to us in the form of stories and rules and finger wagging or encouragement, whatever. But it is really partly being shared with us or directed at us to shape who we are, right? To give us a sense of how the world works, what is right and wrong, how we should treat others, what we should expect from ourselves. All this is being communicated to us in this phase of being 6 to 16. But sometime around when we're 17 or 18 is when we sort of recognize, you know what? I'm actually in charge of this whole thing. I'm in charge of making those decisions. I don't have to do what any of these constituencies have told me. That's a very exciting moment in our lives, without a doubt. But it launches this interesting and complicated and challenging process, which is that if I'm in charge, what do I want to do with my life? Who do I want to spend time with? What do I think I'm capable of? What do I think is right and wrong? Where do I want to go? And I think that this is really central to the story, in that it's a 10-day story, but it's one where Sally, Emmett, Duchess, Willie Townhouse was obviously a smaller character, but all of them are grappling with this to varying degrees. And we're beginning to see what they're shedding from the past, what instruction they're unwilling to accept, what instruction they're embracing from their parents or their schooling or the church or whatever, and how they're beginning to imagine how they want to live their life and what they think is right and wrong and what they think they're capable of. And that's what's happening sort of in this moment in time. But anyway, so I think that's a critical thing. Another thing that came up is there was asking me about research and also about the 50s. And I want to touch on this sort of thing. I think this is kind of an interesting point, I hope. Again, I didn't really think about this until the end of the book. I was excited about writing about the mid-50s. I think the mid-50s is a fascinating time in America. I've written about that on my website, some of the reasons why, sort of the rise of the civil rights movement coming out of the mid-50s, the rise of feminism and the sexual revolution come out of the mid-50s, rock and roll, Vietnam War begins to trickle in the mid-50s, all this stuff, TV. There's a lot of things that are major dynamics of the latter half of the 20th century that are being launched kind of in the mid-50s, but it's still quiet at that moment in time, deceptively quiet, of course. So I was interested anyway, and I was like, yeah, this would be great. So I write the book, and then I think to myself, one of the this thing, suddenly I was like, I've written out this book about these 18-year-olds in 1954. Suddenly I was like, I think my dad might have been around 18 in 1954 himself. My dad passed away a few years ago, but, I kind of did the math. I'm like, oh, yeah, he was born in 35 in December. So I was like, yeah, you know what? He would have been 18 in the summer of 1954. And all of a sudden I was like, oh, of course. And the reason I say that is because, there's so much in our lives that where we know less than we think we do, right? So much. In fact, the majority of what we know is us knowing less than we think we know, right? About anything. But occasionally there's something where we actually know more of it than we think we do, more about it. And so here's an example, is we are clearly know a lot about that, say, time from 6 to 16 that I was talking about, because what goes on in the world between when we're 6 and 16 is a big influence on how we see the world later. So what's going on culturally, economically, politically? Was there a war? Was there a depression? Was there new technology during that phase? Whatever those dynamics were in that decade has lasting influence on us throughout our lives. And it affects how we raise our children. That stuff that we went through at that young age that was so formative. And how it affects how we see the world unfolding in the future. But I think that we are almost as affected by, almost as influenced by, the decade in which our parents came of age. Because when they were 6 to 16, whatever was going on in the world at that time, the economy, the culture, the politics, whatever that stuff was, at home and around the world, that had a huge influence on them, and that affected how they parented us. So we kind of inherit some of it in the form of actual stories. You know, oh, when I was a kid, blah, blah, blah. You know, or my dad used to say this. We learn it in terms of the ethos of our parents, and the personality of our parents is shaped by that. And that kind of comes through us in echo shape. So suddenly I was like, oh, yeah, right. You know, the interest in writing in the mid-50s and the degree to which I felt the liberty to do it and the confidence to do it is probably greatly related to the fact that it was the decade, it was this moment in time when my parents were about 18. And so actually at that point, late in the book, Emmett's birth date is mentioned, and I went back and changed it. I changed it to my dad's birthday. So now Emmett is born on December 12th, 1935, the same day that my father was born. And, you know, that's a nice, I'm glad that it's there.